Good evening. Welcome into the Toasted Tavern. Michael Wagenknecht alongside Scott Tobin for week 2. Yes, this is our second show here on the Fuel Sports Network, and we are so glad to be here. So much to talk about tonight. Things going on currently, things that have just wrapped up. Such a big-time sports Sunday. Lots of stuff to talk about. Before that, though, Scott, how was your week? I know you had the chance to spend the last couple days down at Busch catching the Cardinals Rockies series because you work there. But outside that, how are things for you this past week?
Good, man. Just another busy week and a beautiful weekend at the ballpark, so I can't really complain too much.
It was good weather. That's the thing. And you're in the early stages of June, and you just never know exactly what the weather is going to be like, but not too bad for sure. So let's talk quickly about what we're going to look at in this show overall today. I mean, we're going to start with the Cardinals because it is the here and now. Game is wrapped up today. We kind of know what the last week has been about. Talk some MLB as well. Other things going on in the league that have to be discussed. Going on right now is the XFL Conference Championship game right down the road here in St. Louis between the Battlehawks and the Brahmas. That is currently going on. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've got some NFL news to discuss as well. And then we've got two big championship series going on. Both game ones have wrapped up. Game 2 of the NBA Finals is going to be kicking off here in just a couple of minutes. We've got game 2 of the NHL Stanley Cup Finals tomorrow night as well. Both game ones were something that need to be talked about. A couple of blowout wins in a sense. And I know 3-0 is not necessarily a blowout in the NHL, but it kind of felt that way. So we'll get into that and discuss that a little bit later on in the show. But we're going to start off with the Cardinals. It's where we started off last week because it is something that definitely needs to be talked about. This team, after we wrapped up on Sunday last week, ended up coming back, and after blowing two-run leads, finding a way to beat the Phillies in their final game of that series on Sunday night. And you thought, okay, maybe that is something that can kind of help propel them. They were going to play Houston, a team that's kind of been middling a little bit this year, still a relatively good team. And then they lose 2 of 3. They come back home. They have 4 against the Rockies, and they end up splitting against the Rockies, one of the worst teams in baseball. So a little bit of a confounding week for the Cardinals.
Yeah, not exactly the week you were hoping for. You were hoping you could win a few more of those games, but you look at the series. You talk about the series in Houston. You go back to that game. Game 1 of that series, you got a lead off Justin Verlander. You jump out to a lead, and you have a 4-2 lead, and you get into the back end of your bullpen, which we've talked about being so good. With Kittredge, Romero, and Ryan Helsley, and JoJo Romero blows the tire, gives up 2 home runs and 3 runs, and you end up blowing that game. Otherwise you win 2 out of 3 in Houston. So that was tough, but you were able to bounce back and win that final game against the Astros, and win a game in that series. And then you come home against Colorado, and a disappointing series for sure. And you look at that series and you go, man, I walked out of the ballpark today going, we should have swept that series. I mean, you look at the 2 games that Colorado won, and the Cardinals literally gift-wrapped those 2 games to them. I mean, the game they won against Sonny Gray, the first game of that series, Colorado had 3 runs in that game. They only had 4 hits in the game, and none of their runs scored because of a base hit. You had a throwing error, 3 stolen bases, and 2 groundouts is how they scored 2 of their 3 runs, and the other one scored on a wild pitch. And then the Cardinals just didn't have any luck in this series either. You talk about that game, you go back and look at that game too. Matt Carpenter hits a ball in the 6th inning that is over the right field wall. The Rockies right fielder goes over the wall, takes the home run away. And then in the 7th inning, you get a leadoff hit by Alec Burleson. Paul Goldschmidt hits a ball 106 miles an hour, 400 feet to dead center field, and the center fielder catches it. The very next pitch, Nolan Gorman hits one 398 feet into right center, over 100 miles as well, and the center fielder catches it up against the wall. So you got no luck in that one. You come back and win the second game. You look at the third game, kind of the same thing. You have a couple of throwing errors, 3 or 4 stolen bases. Things just don't go your way, and you try to make a comeback. And Arenado hits the ball that gets caught up against the wall, just not able to get the home run in that one. So you had some bad and ball luck. Ball's just not carrying, and then your defense was a little bit sloppy in a couple of those games, and you gift wrap some runs, and you're coming into the game today thinking, man, we cannot lose 3 out of 4 to Colorado. And Andre Palante comes out and has a really good game again. It's kind of been Jekyll and Hyde with him in his 3 starts. He was really good at Cincinnati, struggled really badly in Houston, only won a couple of innings, gave up 6 runs, and then he comes out today and has total control, goes 5 innings, only gives up 2 hits, and your offense gets some big hits today. I like Burleson, who I have to admit I was wrong about, because early in the season I was like, man, this guy cannot buy a hit. I don't see what the Cardinals see in him. But, they kept saying the guy hits the ball hard. He just has had batted ball luck, and we're seeing it now. He's got 9 home runs all of a sudden, and he's hitting line drives all over the place. He gets a home run today. Mason Wynn comes up with another clutch hit. I mean, that kid, can't say enough about what Mason Wynn's done as a rookie. Everybody talked about, he'll be here and his defense will carry it, and if he hits, $190, we'll be okay. Well, he's hitting over 300 and driving home. He's got 25 RBIs already. I don't think anybody saw that coming, in the middle of June. And then, another clutch hit by Brendan Donovan, which, I mean, you can't say enough about Donnie either. I mean, the guy just goes out there and is the ideal baseball player. He's just what you think of when you think of a Cardinal baseball player, flying around with his helmet flying off and his bandana and his hair flowing in the breeze with that awesome mane that he has. But, he's just the perfect Cardinal, comes up with another clutch hit. And then your bullpen, you didn't have to go with the big 3 today. You got big job by Matthew Liberatore, who's really emerged in the bullpen since they moved him back there. John King's been good. Ryan Fernandez has been good. And they were able to close that game out. And you were able to give those guys, Helsley and JoJo and oh my God, why did I just forget his name? Andrew Kittredge, day off. The day off today and the day off tomorrow, so they should be good and rested when a Pirate team comes into town on Tuesday, that's going to be a really, really tough series when you roll against Pittsburgh.
Well, not only that, I mean, we were talking about this before we came on. I mean, the NL Central is so tightly compact past the Brewers that, everybody's within a half a game of each other. I mean, you've got 3 teams tied and the Pirates right there a half game back. So it's a very, very tight division, and you have to collect the wins where you can. And, I want to talk a little bit more about Matthew Liberatore because, you said he has been stellar in the bullpen this year. And you talk about the fact that this team has a big 3. We talked about it last week about how they've really shortened this game down. Your starters only have to go 5. If you get more, that's great. But now you get a guy like Liberatore that's starting to be a little bit more consistent there in the bullpen. Is this now a big 4, or does this allow you to slot guys into different roles? Maybe use a guy more situationally than just giving him an inning. I mean, it does free up Ollie to do more with the bullpen. But, what do you see Liberatore's role being? Is he more of that long relief guy, or do you think he has the impact that the big 3 that we have right now have later on in the season?
I think it's possible towards later in the season you could see it be almost a big 4. I mean, he's definitely moving into that role. His fastball in the bullpen, it's funny. When he was a starter, he's throwing 92, 93. When he goes to the bullpen, because he's only going for an inning or 2 innings, that fastball jumps up to 95, 96. And for some strange reason, he has way better control of his changeup and his slider when he's in the bullpen compared to when he's in the rotation. And when they're in the bullpen, they're just absolutely wipeout. We were talking before we came on the show, and I told you he's starting to look physically. He kind of reminds me of that. He's tall and lanky, but the way that curveball and the slider and the changeup are starting to work, he's starting to remind me of an Andrew Miller. And if Matthew Liberatore could become Andrew Miller, a guy who could be your closer, could throw 9 innings, but can also go out there and give you 2 or 3 innings when you need him to, and just be absolutely dominant from the left side. If he turns into that, then I think all of a sudden you look at that Randy Arozarena trade and you go, okay, we did get a really good deal out of this, because as good as Arozarena's been, if you got that kind of relief pitcher that Andrew Miller was, if you get some version of that out of Matthew Liberatore, I mean, that's a weapon that it's hard to find.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, we saw what Andrew Miller did for the use of being a bullpen guy. I mean, he wasn't your typical closer. He was the guy that came in and faced the 3, 4, 5 guys in the 8th inning instead of the 9th inning, coming in and get the close, or going 2 innings to get the close. And if you have the ability to have a younger version of that, I mean, we saw Andrew Miller here. Obviously, it didn't work out the way he wanted it to here. But if you've got a guy that is younger and has that same skill set and the same impact, that's absolutely huge. And it also helps when you look at what this team needs to do at the deadline. it kind of allows you to change up a little bit about what you're looking for. Not to say that they were actually going out there looking for a bullpen piece, because I feel like they are comfortable with where they're at now, but you add in a Libator, it really kind of solidifies things and makes you go, okay, now we go out, we find that fifth starter. And if that means Andre Palante goes back into the bullpen, again, that's addition by addition in a sense. You're moving a guy that's been very good in the rotation for 2 of his 3 starts. He's a guy you can stretch out or maybe throw out there to give one of your other guys a bit of a break. It helps there. So now you know that your bullpen is pretty well set. You can focus on maybe finding that fifth starter. And it also allows you to sit there and go, okay, now we may be able to trade from a position of strength as well. Maybe they actually do move one of these bullpen pieces to get an impact bat or something of that nature. Not to say that you want to, break up what you've got going on here, but you do have options. And that's something I don't think Cardinal fans thought they were going to have heading into the deadline or even really heading into this season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the bullpen, you've got all kinds of weapons. And then you've also got another guy in Riley O'Brien, who was kind of the talk of spring training, the Cardinals picked up in the offseason and was just absolutely dominant and got hurt, that first series against the Dodgers and has been out, but he's about to make his way back. So that's another piece that could really be a big weapon. And you got to talk about a guy like Ryan Fernandez, who you picked up from the Red Sox, as a Rule 5 pick, and he's come in and he's been really, really good. John King, who you got last year, was kind of a throw-in the Jordan Montgomery trade, has been really solid out of the bullpen and has really done a nice job. So you've got some pieces in that bullpen. And like you said, when you get to that point of the trade deadline, you can look at, okay, maybe we move Palante back to the bullpen. I still think, and I've said this for a long time, I think that's the place where Steven Matz belongs. We've seen him be better when he's been in the bullpen in the rotation. So maybe Matz becomes a bullpen piece. It's a long shot because we've seen him struggle for the last couple of years, but maybe Giovanni Gallegos finds something again. And maybe when he comes back, he can be some semblance of what he was a couple of years ago. And there's another weapon in your bullpen. So, the Cardinals do have lots of pieces in that bullpen that you can look at, you can mix and match. And Ollie's got a lot to work with. And, we were talking about Andrew Miller, and the version that the Cardinals got. The version of Andrew Miller that the Cardinals got was just his arm was shot because he had been so dominant with Cleveland and the Yankees and they'd used him. Think about that Indians-Cubs World Series. There were games where Indians brought him in the 6th inning and he pitched the last 4 innings of games. And the Yankees kind of did the same thing with him. You just threw him out there and you said, okay, we're shutting down the rest of this game. It's, go get 12 outs for us. And he did it consistently for years and was absolutely dominant. So, if like I said, if Matthew Libator can be some version of that, then that's just a weapon that, like I said, is just invaluable to the team.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the offense now. It's, again, something that has been a point of contention for this team. They've gotten better as of late. Paul Goldschmidt's starting to hit a little bit more. Nolan Arenado starting to hit a little bit more as well. You've already talked about Wynn and Donovan and what they've been able to do. But the one guy that I think we both are happy to see been successful the last couple of games is a Dylan Carlson. Is a guy that has struggled through injury. He's struggled through finding a spot on this team, and he really struggled coming into this year. We were talking about last week, he hadn't had an extra base hit at all this season, and now he came up in game 2, tied the game, added some insurance with a double. He's starting to put it together a little bit at the plate as well. And we talk about defense winning games and winning championships. That's something that he does provide. He is a good defensive outfielder. And now that he's able to hit, and you're starting to see production from the outfield positions, which is something we didn't really see a whole lot throughout the early part of this season. Again, it just makes this team a little bit more dangerous. And yes, you're still sitting 6.5 back of the Brewers of first place in the Central, but you're right there in the wild card conversation. And your team starts getting hot offensively. You go through a little bit of a run of some of these sub 500 teams, and all of a sudden you're talking about adding at the deadline, which is what Mozeliak was talking about the other day. And you're talking about a team that's challenging for a playoff spot and maybe home playoff positioning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I always hate talking about because, people say, oh, somebody comes back from an injury. It's like making a trade, which, it's not because it's guys you already had. But you look at this team and with what this offense has done, and then you say, okay, Wilson Contreras has been cleared. I was watching him throw on the field for the game today. His arm looks good, man. It's going to be a couple of weeks, and we're going to see Wilson back in this lineup. But if you can bring back a healthy Wilson Contreras and what he was doing offensively early in the season, you get into July and you can get Lars Nootbaar. And we saw when Nootbaar started to get healthy and get his swing back is when this offense really started to take off and go on that hot streak a couple of weeks ago. You get Contreras back. You get Nootbaar back. Tommy Edman will wait and see if maybe he comes back. If Jordan Walker can figure it out, and if at some point in July, into June or July, you add Jordan Walker, I mean, it's not trades, but those are just more weapons that you're adding to the depth of this team and more pieces that can make this team more dangerous. We talked about it before we came on the show. If you look at all the people that this team is missing and has missed this season, to be where they're at right now is pretty amazing, honestly. The fact that they are within a couple of games of 500 and they are, only 6.5 games out of first place, and they're right there in the wild card. Because think about this. Your starting planned outfield has not played together one pitch this season. How many teams could do that and then not be and still be tied for second place? Two of the guys that you were counting on to be in the back end of your bullpen, and Gallegos and Middleton, haven't been there. I mean, Middleton hasn't been there all year and isn't going to be there this year. Gallegos was ineffective and hasn't really been there. Steven Matz hasn't been there. I mean, there's just so many things that you're missing, and yet this team has found a way to keep themselves afloat. And that's what we always talk about. Stay afloat, keep yourself in it until the All-Star break, and then, fix the deficiencies. And if you're Mo, if you're Mo and the DeWitts, you have to be looking around going, okay, we've dealt with all these injuries. We've dealt with all these problems. And we're right here, and nobody's running away with it. The Braves have struggled. The Braves have injuries. Milwaukee, you look at Milwaukee. Milwaukee's lost 5 out of their 6. They got swept by Philly, and then they just went to Detroit and lost 2 out of 3 over the weekend. So, it's not like the Brewers are a dominant team. The Dodgers are good, but the Dodgers haven't run away with it like everybody thought they were going to. And the West is not as good. The Padres, the Giants, the Diamondbacks, you're right there with all of those teams in the records. If you're the Cardinals, you got to look around and say, man, this thing is wide open. If we make a move or two and get healthy, we could be the best team in this league. And I know people will laugh at me when I say that, but it's honestly the truth when you really look at it.
Well, and this team has always played up to the competition as well. They always play the Dodgers tough. They always play, they played the Phillies tough. Yes, they lost 2 out of 3, but they played them tough in that series. They play the Braves tough all the time. So, it's a team that it's always there when the going gets tough. Yes, they haven't really won much in the playoffs over the last, 10 years or so. But still, they are a team that does play a little bit more above their means sometimes. And it's also nice to see that this depth that this club has talked about for years is actually now kind of showing fruition. We've talked about it in the last handful of years. Oh yeah, this team has depth. They've got pitching depth. They've got this depth and that depth, and it never really panned out. Guys just didn't produce. They didn't show up. But because you were seeing a lot of these younger guys coming in to play meaningful games, that's what's led us to this point. That's the thing. The depth it's not immediate when you're talking about, young players. They had to get up here and experience it. And now we're seeing what that depth is all about, because those 3 starting outfielders haven't played a game, because the back end of your bullpen has kind of been a mishmash early on the season because guys that you expected to be there weren't there or aren't there. And your starting rotation as well. The planned starting rotation, while not sexy to start with, has done really, really well. And now you've thrown a guy like Palante in there that's been serviceable in that 5th rotation spot, and it allows you to maybe free yourself up to look at a trade to bring somebody in to bolster that rotation. It's not a sexy team, but this is the Midwest, where we are blue collar through and through. And that's what this team is. They are a hardworking team, and they're going to find ways to win. It's going to be ugly sometimes. Okay. Most of the time it's going to be ugly, but they do find ways to win. And now you're starting to see that come to fruition. And it's going to be one of those things. This series against the Pirates, especially with Paul Skeens pitching in that series to open things up, it's going to be a very important one.
Oh, it absolutely is. You're going to see Pittsburgh's at least 2, if not all 3 of Pittsburgh's really good young pitchers, starting with Paul Skeens, which is going to be an event. I'm looking forward to watching him pitch on Tuesday night, and at the same time, I'm like, man, I wish we could have missed him. I'd love to see him pitch against somebody else. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting night at the ballpark Tuesday night. You're going to see Paul Skeens on the field, and then rumor has it Libby Dunn will be roaming around the ballpark on Tuesday night as well. So, there'll be lots of eyes on the Cardinals Pirates game on Tuesday night.
Well, you were telling me you got to be somebody's bodyguard today. You think you can swing another bodyguard shift on Tuesday?
I've already volunteered, believe me.
Well, if you haven't gotten your tickets, definitely get the tickets for Tuesday's game, especially, and see a great electric pitcher and maybe run into somebody incredibly famous that's not in Major League Baseball. All right, we're going to take a quick break, thank one of our sponsors, and come back, talk a little bit more MLB. Now, we talked about it last week as well. Royals continue to be a bit of a surprise in the American League, although at this point, I don't know if you can really say surprise because it's been very, very consistent. Now, they still sit about 3 games behind the Guardians in the AL Central, but they are a team that can hit. They lead the league in runs batted in. They're 5th in batting average. They're still a very highly successful team in the stolen base category as well. And they're just a team that's exciting to watch. And it's nice to have that kind of baseball on both sides of the state here. Obviously, we've talked about the speed with the Cardinals, but the speed with the Royals is there as well. And they've been getting it from the pitching side of things. It's just been a great season overall for the Royals, and hopefully it continues. They did end up losing today to the Mariners, but they took 2 of 3, including a incredible comeback after being down by 8 after a 7-run first inning. Bobby Witt had a huge triple and ended up scoring the game-winning run. The Royals are an exciting team, and I think there's not enough people talking about them, and they should be.
Yeah, they're kind of flying under the radar, which is kind of what the Royals do. They've done that. They did that with their mid-teens teams, that made those World Series runs. It wasn't until they got to the postseason in 14 and made that run that people really started to pay attention to them going into 15. And you're going to kind of see that with this team. The only difference with this team is that people around baseball know who Bobby Witt is already. He's already kind of caught the attention. People are starting to realize, okay, this is one of the most exciting shortstops in baseball because he can do everything. And isn't it cool that we've got 2 great shortstops on both sides of the state right now with Mason Wynn and Bobby Witt? You've got 2 young electric shortstops that are going to be kind of cornerstones of their franchise for the next decade or more, which is really cool to see.
Well, you want to see that. I mean, you want to see the youth being served. And for the Royals, they were talking about that youth movement. Yes, they've got Salvador Perez there as kind of that leader there. But you're seeing, again, just like the Cardinals, that youth is now starting to produce and they're winning. And that's the great thing. And they're doing it with pitching as well. I mean, Seth Lugo had his worst outing of the year against Cleveland, gave up 5 runs in 6 innings, but didn't take the loss in that game because the offense has been doing a lot for the Royals. I mean, that was a 10-9 game in that first game against Seattle. I believe they won the second game 8-4. And even today's game was relatively high scoring. So it's not that they're just getting the pitching, but they're getting timely hits and big offensive contributions, not just from Witt and Perez. And we talked about it last week. You're seeing names that are not familiar. And sometimes those are the ways you need to go about winning games. And that's exactly what they're proving.
Yeah. They're young players that aren't proven names, but in a year or so they will be. People are going to start realizing who some of these guys are because they're proving it on the field, and that's how you do it. And they're hungry. They're a young team that struggled for the last few years, and like you said, they've gone through the growing pains they had to after the Hosmer years and Moustakas years. They had a couple of years where they kind of had to rebuild and redevelop their farm system, and they did that, and they drafted well, and now they're seeing that come to fruition, and they're going to be a force in that AL Central for quite a while. The amazing thing to me is the Guardians, man. I did not see Cleveland doing what they're doing this year, especially when they lost Shane Bieber for the season early.
Yeah, we were talking personally between the two of us that was the guy that the Cardinals were possibly targeting, especially considering the Cleveland Guardians wouldn't probably have a great season. And not only did they lose him, but they sit at the top of the division. So it just shows you the leadership that they have there and the talent that they have there as well. And honestly, if they win the division, does that free up them to say, hey, when Bieber comes back, maybe he pitches another year and he becomes a trade chip for them to continue to expand their roster and make themselves better.
That'll be interesting. I think he has 1 year left on his deal. So, next year will be kind of a prove it year as he comes back from Tommy John to see how that all works out. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. And that's kind of been the MO of the Indians/Guardians over the years, is when those starting pitchers, get to that point, they trade them for young assets, and then they kind of move back up. And we've seen them do that. Think of all the pitchers that have come through Cleveland in the last few years, the last decade, really, that have gone on to be really, really talented and help out the Indians/Guardians and then other teams around the league. And you can go back, even names like a guy who may be showing up in the major leagues sooner than anybody thought, in Trevor Bauer, who apparently the Astros and a few other teams are all of a sudden watching him very closely. So, you got guys like him and Clevenger and Westbrook and all these guys that, have come through in the last decade. And then when they got close to free agency, they moved on from to bring in these younger assets, and they've just kept that team going, and that's what really successful small to mid-market teams have to do. And the Guardians have kind of really set the example of that for really going back to the 90s. When you think about the teams with Tomey and Ramirez and Albert Bell and Carlos Baerga and all of those, really, Kenny Lofton. I mean, going back to the mid-90s, I mean, they've just continued to bring in young kids and just kept that system rolling.
It's been incredible. I mean, I remember the Chuck Finley deal for the Cardinals, bringing him in and knowing what he did for this team as well. But let's touch on the Trevor Bauer situation, because this is one of those stories that is very, I want to say unique, because it's a story that has many twists and turns to it. It has many layers to it as well, and it's one of those that it's about redemption, but at the same time, you look at it and there's still that oiliness to it as well that makes you go, I don't know if this is right or not. But what is your take on the Trevor Bauer situation? Because he was never found guilty of anything. It wasn't anything that in a sense hurt the game. He wasn't charged legally with anything as well, so low laws were broken. And yet he's still being blacklisted, at least up until this point, from pitching in the majors.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely an ugly situation. It was nasty. There were some pretty alarming allegations in that whole thing, and some things that dug into his personal life that made you question, Trevor Bauer. Just, I mean, there were already questions about Trevor Bauer. He had not been the easiest guy to get along with in some of the places that he'd been. He'd had run-ins with different players, different teammates at times, and was kind of surly with the media. And so he already had that against him. And then you throw in all of these other things, and a lot of teams said, you know what, we just don't want to touch this guy. Yeah, he's talented, but there's a whole lot of red flags there. And then, things kind of played out, like you said, there were no real criminal charges. It's kind of a he said, she said in a lot of ways. There's a lot of stuff there that we could get into, but that would take a whole nother show just to get into all of the things that we learned during the Trevor Bauer saga. But, he's he didn't commit a crime. He was never charged with anything. He has kind of taken his punishment. It's been, a year and a half now since he's pitched in the major leagues. So, I mean, guys do get redeemed and do get second chances all the time. And, if a team looks around and says, you know what, I think our fan base will be accepting. I think if he comes in here and is a standout guy, then he helps our team. And it's kind of a low risk, high reward thing with Trevor Bauer, because, I mean, you can sign him to basically the league minimum, bring him in and say, okay, you do one thing we don't like and you're out of here. You pitch well and we'll see what happens. And so, maybe somebody signs him and you catch lightning in a bottle and he's the Trevor Bauer of a few years ago and he really helps your team. And if he doesn't, then you say, okay, we gave it a shot. Now you got to go. Remember, the Cardinals did that. His allegations weren't quite as bad, but remember when the Cardinals kind of took a flyer on Sidney Ponson about a decade ago? It didn't work out. The Cardinals ended up releasing him after a couple of months, but the Cardinals, after he kind of took his punishment, Cardinals kind of gave him a shot there. So, again, not quite the same level of things that Bauer had against him, but, sometimes you give a guy a second shot and just see what happens. And, it doesn't sound like the Cardinals are going to do that. John Mozeliak's kind of said, they don't think they would touch that. But, maybe a team, does say, okay, he's kind of served his penance. Let's give him a shot and see if he can find redemption and he can be that missing piece. And if he does and he can be a stand-up guy, then you hope he can help himself and kind of rehabilitate himself in his career.
Well, it could also be a smokescring too. I mean, it could be one of those, yeah, we don't want to touch that. And really, they're secretly negotiating with him and they make the announcement in a couple of days. Who knows? But yeah, it's a really interesting story. Definitely one to keep an eye on as the next couple of weeks go on leading up to the trade deadline, because that can also affect the moves that other teams make as well. So definitely something to watch as we go. For the Yankees, though, they may be getting back their ace very, very soon. Garrett Cole has made a couple of rehab starts, probably has one more before potentially rejoining the Yankees rotation. And that could be very, very big for a team that is very, very good right now in the American League. One of the tops there over there in the AL East. They've quietly gone about becoming the best team in the American League. I mean, you look at it and you don't hear a whole lot, and that's really kind of crazy considering it's the Yankees. I mean, you and I both grew up in the 90s, and it was Yankees this, Yankees that. When they were great, they were great. And yet now, being in the big market, you just don't hear a lot about what the Yankees are doing, despite the star power they have, despite the wins that they are putting together. They're quietly going about their business and could very possibly be one of the better teams in Major League Baseball.
It's kind of funny because going into the season, there was a lot of hype about him when you went and got Juan Soto, but then it was kind of like Garrett Cole got hurt, and everybody went, oh, man, the Yankees are going to fall apart again, because we've seen it happen because their pitching has had so many issues the last few years. So they have kind of flown under the radar, and they are better than I think a lot of people anticipated them being. Now it'll be interesting to see, like you said, you're going to get Garrett Cole back. Can he come back and be Garrett Cole, or does he have issues? What kind of Garrett Cole are you getting back? And then the big thing is going to be, it looks like he avoided a major injury, but Juan Soto's got a little issue that he's kind of sitting out a few days with a forearm issue. It doesn't look like it's anything structural that he's going to miss a long amount of time, but that may slow him down a little bit. And I mean, I think a lot of people are looking at it going, yeah, it's the Yankees and they're off to a great start, but we know at some point Aaron Judge is going to get hurt. We know at some point Giancarlo Stanton's going to get hurt, and we know at some point Anthony Rizzo is going to go through a huge slump. And I think everybody's just kind of waited for that other shoe to drop, and so far it hasn't for Yankees fans. But it'll be interesting to see, because they're still in a race. It's going to be neck and neck down the stretch between them and the Orioles to see who wins that division, because that Baltimore team is unbelievably talented.
Oh, yeah, they are really, really good. The Yankees are playing the Dodgers right now on Sunday Night Baseball. They fell in the first two games of that series, 2-1 in 11 innings, and then they got blown out 11-3 yesterday. And you look at that series and you go, is this potentially a World Series preview? You could say yes, because they're tops in their divisions right now, but you have so many teams that are still stacked really close, including Baltimore, that at this point in time, you just cannot sit there and say there is one team that is head and shoulders above the others in either league or overall in Major League Baseball. So, yeah, this could be the preview of the World Series right now, but in 3 weeks, you could be talking about, Baltimore and Philadelphia playing, and that could be a World Series preview. So, I mean, it's a fun season so far this year because there are so many teams involved, but it does make the trade deadline that much more complicated because so many teams are out there searching.
It is. It's going to be really interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see if it could. I mean, you wonder if some teams try to jump the market and say, okay, you guys lost 5 out of 6 and you're starting to fall out of it. Let's make a trade right now. Do some teams get desperate and overpay to try to pull off a trade with somebody to do something, to try to make that big splash, because it looks like it is going to be so hard to make moves at the trade deadline. And, going back to the Cardinals real quick, John Mozelle kind of hinted at that the other day, that the Cardinals were going to start looking at the waiver wire and starting to look at the trade market now to see if they need to be one of those teams that gets overly aggressive and makes a trade early. So it'll be interesting to see if teams try to do that, and if teams are willing to say, yeah, we're 7 games out or we're 8 games out. Yeah, there's a bunch of us hovering right here, but we don't really think that we could get in and do a whole lot. So, yeah, we will go ahead and make a move. It's just going to be interesting to see. And like you said, talking about teams, can there be a clear-cut favorite? I mean, no, because, you talk about the Dodgers. I think Philadelphia is a better team than the Dodgers are right now. And the American League's so stacked, you can make a case for the Orioles. We talked about the Guardians and the Royals, and I know they don't hit a lot, but do you really want to go into a 7-game series and run into Seattle and that pitching that they have? Because they can throw 5 1s and 2s at you in a 7-game series, and you're all of a sudden you're done. So it's going to be really interesting as we roll towards playoff time.
And Julio Rodriguez starting to get a little hot as well. So you're able to throw in some of that offense. And yeah, Seattle is a tough out for sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and talk a little bit about what's going on down at the Dome in St. Louis. We'll be right back with more Toasted Tavern. Well, down at the Dome, it is the XFL Conference Championship game between San Antonio and your St. Louis Battlehawks. And I know a lot of people on this Fuel Sports Network are heavily invested in what is going on down at the Dome. And most of you are probably watching that game as you're listening to us as well. So you kind of see what's going on. And it's a bit of a mirror image of last week's game in which the offense for the Battlehawks has struggled against this defense of the Brahmas. And you know, it's one of those things you were talking about it before we went on air that, you know, it's kind of been the same thing from year one with this Battlehawks team, that second half issues when it comes to offense and just being able to complete games. And right now they're down 13-3 with about 22 seconds left in the first half. The Battlehawks have the ball after a Brahmas punt. So we'll see if they can get any more points on the board before the first half expires. But you know, you look at this and you go, man, with the way that this team started the season and the way the defense is played, the fact that they are in a struggle of a game right now is a bit surprising.
It is, you know, and this team just hasn't been, let's face it, this offense hasn't been the same since A.J. McCarron got hurt. Mm-hmm. You know, you had a couple of weeks where you didn't have him and you had your backups out there, you know, and they did the best they could. And then A.J. came back last week and, you know, you pulled off the win, but he kind of struggled offensively and kind of having struggles today. So you hope that maybe in that second half he can figure some things out and get this offense rolling again, because this was a prolific offense for most of the season. So hopefully they can figure some things out at halftime and come back out and get themselves back in it. Maybe it's setting up. Remember what was it, about 25 years ago? There was a championship game in St. Louis at the Dome, and a prolific offense didn't look too good until the last couple of minutes, and then somebody threw a rainbow pass into the end zone to a guy who might have something to do with the coaching staff at the Battlehawks, and he caught a touchdown, and the Rams went to the Super Bowl. So you never know. We'll see what happens. Maybe there could be another miracle in the Dome.
Well, and not only is Ricky Prohl there, but, you know, Torrey Holt is also in the building. He delivered the game ball before the start of this one. So a lot of St. Louis playoff and Super Bowl magic is in the building. So we don't necessarily believe in conspiracies and about, you know, fixing things and all that stuff. But the fact that the championship game is in St. Louis next week, the fact that the Battlehawks are the team that draws the most fans of any in the UFL, there has to be, if they don't have the Battlehawks in this championship game, things are not going to be what the UFL expected them to be, as we got a bit of an injury on the field here with McCarron going down. So that is not a good look there for the Battlehawks, as McCarron grabbing that ankle once again as the first half has expired, a 13-3 Brahmas lead. But again, like I said, for the UFL, I'm not saying that they need the Battlehawks in that championship game, but they kind of need the Battlehawks in that championship game. It just to fill that stadium and show the major networks that it is something that is profitable and that they can really watch and see the growth of this league. If the Battlehawks aren't there, this could be a debacle for the UFL. And that's not to say that the Brahmas and the Stallions aren't the two best teams in the league. They probably very much are. But as far as fans coming to St. Louis to see these two teams play, I mean, they can't draw more than 10,000 to their own stadiums, much less are they going to have fans traveling to St. Louis to watch this game.
You know what, though? As loyal as Battlehawks fans are and as good as football fans are in St. Louis, there will be a lot of fans that even if the Battlehawks don't go, they will show up and be at that game next week to show, because it's on national television, as much to kind of stick it to the NFL and say, hey, look, we're still here. You know, so I mean, will it be, you know, I know they're hoping that the Battlehawks are there and it's a sellout, which if they're not, it definitely won't be. But, you know, could you still draw 30,000 people if the Battlehawks aren't there? I think it's possible because I think there's a lot of people that are going to say, hey, we need to prove that St. Louis is still a sports town and a football town, and let's show the whole country that we show up when there's a big championship game in our city. And so I think fans would still show up. I mean, it would definitely be disappointing because you're not going to get the attendance you were hoping for if the Battlehawks are there. But I think a big crowd would still show up. And talking about former Rams that are in the building, not only are Ricky and Torrey Holt there, but did you know that for the first time ever, the Rams or the Battlehawks are on the radio, and on the call of that game on the radio on 97.1 would be one, our friend and KMOX sports director, Tom Ackerman, and soon to be guest on Toasted Tavern. And the other one would be the 99 Rams offensive coordinator and 2000 onward head coach, Mike Martz, is in the building as well. So, there's lots of Rams connections in St. Louis. So maybe a little Rams magic sprinkles on the Battlehawks in the second half.
Well, they're going to need Misty Miyagi in the locker room to work on that ankle of AJ McCarron if they want to have even more magic. So we'll see how that plays out. Second half will be coming up here in about 15-20 minutes on the television and on 97.1. Keeping with the football focus, we'll talk a little bit about the NFL. I mean, it's kind of a dead period for the NFL right now, as training camps are not active right now. A couple of different stories and a couple of different angles that we got to talk about real quick here. First off, Darren Waller announcing retirement at age 31 with the Giants, the tight end. Just had the divorce from Kelsey Plum, and then the disastrous rap video that came out. But a little bit of a surprise that he would make that decision to retire, although he's been, fraught with injuries the last couple of years, hasn't really been able to produce the way I think he wants to produce and the way teams think he should produce as well. But are we going to – I know this is a difficult thing to talk about because everybody is different, all players are different and all that stuff, but are we going to potentially, with the way concussions and head injuries have become huge parts of the NFL landscape the last handful of years, do you see potentially the age of retirement kind of skewing a little bit younger as we go along the next couple of years?
I don't know that it's concussions or injuries. I think it's more the guaranteed money that guys are getting, in the first parts of their contracts, that they're able to set themselves up. And, when they do start to have an injury or don't feel like they're producing like they would, they are able to walk away at a younger age. So, yeah, I think with some guys, you're going to see that happen, especially the guys that don't necessarily love the game the way that some other players do. Because, while we don't want to think that, there are some guys that are just playing the game because of the fact that they make money. And so, some of those guys, you're going to see walk away at a younger age because they can. And, I think that's something that's going to continue to happen in certain situations.
And then on the flip side, a bit of a scary incident for the Chiefs earlier this week. B.J. Thompson suffered seizures and went into cardiac arrest at the Chiefs practice facility on Thursday. But the good news, he is alert, he is awake, coming through it quite well, according to the Chiefs. But another scary situation, and it kind of leads into what we just talked about retiring at an early age. You're seeing some of this stuff happening. And again, it's kind of person specific, but we've seen a couple of cardiac arrest incidents over the last couple of years with the NFL. Everything's getting faster, getting hits harder, and things are just ramping up. I don't think this is going to change people's viewing habits, and I think the NFL is as strong as ever, but it is a bit concerning when we talk a little bit about this with hockey as well. I mean, you're getting faster, bigger, and harder hits in both those games. Are we potentially coming to a precipice, or maybe we got to take both these games and maybe reverse course just a little bit, maybe try to slow things down?
No, I don't know. I don't know how you do that, honestly. I mean, you can't tell guys, okay, get smaller and slower. I mean, that's not going to work. And I mean, it's a scary thing, but it happens in all sports. I mean, we've seen people have cardiac arrest issues on the basketball court. We've seen it. Heck, it happened at the Cardinal game the other night in Houston. One of the Houston's dugout people had a cardiac arrest situation in the dugout, in between innings. So things happen in sports. Things happen in life. I don't think it's going to change the way you do football or hockey. I just don't think it can. I mean, it's horrible and it's scary when it happens, but it's just a part of life, and it's just something that happens to people, unfortunately, from time to time. But I don't think it's going to affect anything too much right now.
Well, I mean, we have seen the changes that they're going to make to the kickoffs in the NFL, taking the stuff from the XFL. So, I mean, I'm not saying that doesn't completely change the game, but I mean that is one of the methods that they're using to limit the concussions or the horrific injuries that we see as well. I mean, so it may not be big changes, but maybe we do see some smaller tweaks that
Yeah.
maybe could help.
Yeah, I mean they're always trying to come up with little tweaks and little things. That's just like being able to use the soft shell helmets now in games if
Yep.
you want to. I don't know that anybody's going to do that in a game. For one thing, how do you make that work in a game? Because if you're wearing those soft shell helmets over your helmet, think about being a quarterback and trying to decipher, okay, is that my guy in the white padded helmet, or is that because you can't take the time to be looking at jerseys? As you know what I mean. It's just because that's a sight decision. You see the color of the helmet and you throw the ball. Well, if everybody's wearing white padded helmets, how does that work?
Unless they make them team color specific or helmet color specific, that would be the only way I could see it working.
Except that a lot of the teams have the same colored helmets.
That's true, and you're also covering up logos as well. So from a
Right?
marketing
Yeah.
perspective,
You're gonna what that's gonna do is gonna slow down the quarterback's thought process, which then is gonna open them up to taking bigger hits and putting them in more risk because they're gonna be in the pocket longer, trying to go, hey, is that my guy or is that a defender? Let me look at the number and the color of his jersey real quick.
oh man, so many different pieces that go into that you didn't even think about when you first started and heard the news that it was an option. That wasn't even anything that entered into my mind, but now that you say it, it's like, yeah, that's 100% exactly what would happen. So yeah, you may be preventing injuries from a running back or for a wide receiver, but maybe your quarterback takes more injuries because he's getting sacked more.
Yeah, and you're going to see that happen. You're going to have more penalties because the offensive line is going to have to try to hold longer. There's just a whole lot of things that could happen that you have to think about when you try to do something like that. And again, a lot of the players aren't going to want to do it because they're going to go, man, I don't want to look soft on the field, because then somebody, then I'm going to become a target because people are going to be like, oh man, he's weak. We can hit him here and put it in the back of their mind. So there's just a whole lot of different aspects to that I don't think you'll see it in games right away, or at least not very often in games right away.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Well, as we said, second half of the XFL Conference Championship getting ready to get underway back down at the Dome in St. Louis. We'll take one more break, come back, talk a little bit about the NBA and the NHL championships. All right, back here on the Toasted Tavern. It is championship season for the NBA and the NHL. The NBA Finals Game 2 going on as we speak. Dallas Mavericks holding a 4-point lead in the second quarter, 33-29 over the Boston Celtics. And Game 1 was an absolute butt whooping by the Boston Celtics against the Dallas Mavericks. And we talked a little bit about it at the end of the show last week. We didn't get into it because we ran out of time, but the Celtics had been off for 9 days before, playing in Game 1. Mavericks obviously kind of still on that hype of just winning a series and moving into the NBA Finals. And we were wondering what that would actually do because we've seen teams on long rest come out rusty, come out sloppy, end up losing Game 1, and eventually sometimes losing that series as well. But the Celtics pretty much proved everybody wrong by just coming out and absolutely dominating 6 players in double figures. All 5 starters hit double digits in that game. And Kristaps Porzingis, 20 points and 6 boards off the bench. I mean, it was an absolute clinic by the Celtics. And Jason Tatum didn't even have a whole lot to say in that game. And yet the Celtics blew them out 107-89.
Yeah, Kristaps Porzingis was the difference in that game. I mean, who saw that coming? He had 18 points in like the first 6 minutes he was on the court, it felt like. I mean, he looked like the kid that when he first came up with the Knicks a few years ago, when everybody thought he was going to be the next big thing before he ran into injuries and stuff. But yeah, he showed you what he could do, and that's just another weapon for the Celtics. And, when they can blow people out like they did, and Jason Tatum, like you said, not have to score 40, that's huge. That brings me to a question. Did you hear Jason Kidd's comments this week that Jason Tatum's not the best player on the Celtics, that Jaylen Brown is their best player? And is that just Jason Kidd trying to get in Jason Tatum's head, hoping that he will try to step up and try to take control and prove he's a superstar and not be as team-centric as they were in game one?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think that, it definitely was a mind play by Jason Kidd. I mean, obviously he was one of the best point guards in his era, so he knows a little bit about what it takes to maybe motivate a star player like a Jason Tatum. But I also think Brown very well possibly could be the better player. I mean, overall, Jason Tatum is a great player. He probably is one of the best players in the league, but Brown's been doing very, very well in this postseason. Yeah, the track record isn't that long, but I mean, there could be a little truth to that as well. I think if you look at it, and I don't want this to sound negative towards Jason Tatum, because I think he's a great player. It doesn't seem like Tatum has that killer edge that some of these superstar players have, that he can take over a game, but I don't think he has that edge to just stomp down on a game, where it looks like from Jaylen Brown's perspective, he does have a little bit of that edge to him. And again, it's not a slight, because I think Jason Tatum, he is a great player. He's a great team player. He's a guy that reads the court very, very well. He knows and understands the flow of the game. He doesn't have to be the guy that goes out there and gets 40 points a game. He trusts his teammates, and I think that makes you a better player overall. But when you're talking about pure scoring, I think that's where Brown maybe has a slight edge. I can see why Jason Kidd would have said that.
Yeah, except that, Tatum, what you just said about Jason Tatum is what you should want your superstar
to
do.
Yes.
Is to not be worried about how many points I scored tonight. It's about the team and being more team-centric. And so, it'll be interesting to see what he does, if he does try to step up his scoring, or if he plays the way he did in game one, which worked out really well for the Celtics.
Well, Celtics now have taken a 36-35 lead. So just like that, things have flipped over. And just taking a quick look at the stats right now, Tatum 1 of 7 for 2 points. So not a great start off for him. And looking at Brown, he's only got 4 points on 2 of 4 shooting. So it's been White and Holiday that have actually kind of been the guy. And Porzingis, again, he's got 10 points off the bench so far in this second game for the Celtics. And you look at it and you go, okay, game one, absolute blowout. Weren't sure what the Celtics were going to bring out there on, 9 days rest in a sense. And they jumped out to a hugely 29-point lead in that first half for the Celtics. But credit the Mavs, they came back, cut it down to 8 before the Celtics went on another bit of a run, 14-0 run, to kind of extend that lead back out. So, what does rest do for a team like the Celtics? I mean, did it benefit them? Because you saw in game one, obviously they blew them out, but now a little bit more of a tightly contested game here in game two. And, maybe this is the flow of how this series is going to go, more tightly compact.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a tight series. The rest thing in sports is such a weird thing in the postseason as to how it affects teams, and it affects everybody differently, because we've seen it really help people. And then we've seen lots of teams in all sports where they get those extra days off and they come out and it's like they can never get back in that rhythm again.
Right.
So I think it affects different players and different teams differently, and you just never really know what that's going to be or what's the best thing. If it's to just continually keep playing and never get out of rhythm, or if having rest and kind of being able to recuperate and get healthy is the key. It's just hard to say, because it never seems to work the same way for anybody or any team.
Well, it's almost like sports is, a microcosm of life. Everybody's different. Every team is different. And every situation is different. It's odd how that works, right?
And anybody can beat anybody on any given day, or we're going to throw out any more sports cliches.
I mean, right? All sports cliches. And one other thing to note, as we're taking a quick look at the UFL game, A.J. McCarron back out on the field for the second half. We'll see how that holds up as he goes along. Talking about injured players, Luka Doncic as well. He has been just beat up this postseason. He was listed as questionable tonight, been listed as questionable for multiple games this postseason, yet has played in every game this postseason. Leads the league in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and minutes for a guy that has a thoracic contusion, a right knee sprain, and left ankle soreness. The toughness of this guy. I mean, you want to see the Celtics and Jason Tatum, hometown kid, win the championship, but if the Mavs end up taking this one, how can you not look at Luka and be like, dude totally deserves it?
Yeah, and you got to give him credit, because in this day and age, there's a whole lot of players in the NBA and other sports that would be like, oh, I'm too beat up. I can't play tonight. I can't play game 2, So that just shows his will and his desire to win and to be there for his teammates, which is exactly what you want from the guy who's supposed to be the face of your franchise.
Oh, almost like he's kind of like a hockey player who will play through injury, through anything to win a championship. Interesting how that works. And speaking of hockey, Stanley Cup playoffs got underway as well yesterday. Florida Panthers, a 3-0 victory over the Edmonton Oilers in game 1 of what's going to probably be one of the more electric Stanley Cup finals we've had in a long time. And I know you're sitting there going, okay, Edmonton, I see. Florida, really electric, but they really are. I mean, you've got Sergei Bobrovsky in net, who made 32 saves, shutting out the Oilers and really going head-to-head with Connor McDavid. 6 shots on goal for McDavid, and Bobrovsky was up to the task every single time. And the Panthers have a lot of weapons offensively as well. And really, they didn't even get going last night. I mean, Carter Verhaeghe was the one who opened the scoring. And, you look at Matthew Tkachuk, didn't even figure into the scoring last night. And that's a bit of a scary proposition for the Oilers. The fact that he wasn't on the score sheet and you still lost, which means, yeah, you probably did a good job defending him. But if you have to start pulling off of him to defend other players and he lights things up, watch out. These Panthers could run away with this one quickly.
That's funny that you say that, and I was going to ask you if you heard this. I heard a national broadcaster on one of the biggest sports channels in the country yesterday say that Florida had absolutely no chance in this series because Edmonton was full of superstars, and Florida didn't have anybody that anybody never even heard of before, just a bunch of guys.
Not like Carter Verhaeghe hasn't been a playoff stud. Not that, Matthew Tkachuk is, born from legendary stock. Not that, and I know Bobrovsky has had his issues when it comes to playoffs, but this guy is a 2-time Vezina Trophy champion, and what he's been able to do in this postseason has been nothing short of incredible. And how many times have we seen superstar-laden teams not win championship, especially when they go up against a blue-collar team like the Panthers? I mean, it happens all the time.
Oh, I know. It just killed me because, like you said, Matthew Tkachuk was so huge in the playoffs last year. And the co-host of the show, I'm not going to say who it was that I was listening to, but the co-host brought that up, and the guy goes, the only reason anybody knows who Matthew Tkachuk is because his dad was Keith.
Wow. So, yeah, just trying to take away the stardom. The nepotism is there. I bet you he's a guy that doesn't like Joe Buck as well. Probably.
There's a lot of those people.
There are a lot of those people. Well, the winner of Game 1 in the Stanley Cup Finals has won 75.6% of the time as of last year. Not only that, if the home team wins Game 1, 83.1% of the time do they win the Stanley Cup. So Florida sitting pretty after that. And if you just drop down and look at some of the stats as well, they had 3 goals on 17 shots. Obviously, the shots have to get increased for the Panthers. Take some of that pressure off of Bobrovsky. But they did it in the faceoff dot. 59.6% of the faceoffs went to the Panthers in that game. They also laid the lumber on them, 57 hits to 32 for the Oilers. So it's a team, you look at it and say, yes, they're star-laden with the Oilers, but if they continue to get hit and hit and hit and hit, at what point does that wear them down? On the flip side, though, Edmonton has killed 30 straight penalties off. So they are still doing things right, and their biggest question mark, Stuart Skinner in net, had a good game as well. I mean, yes, he only faced 17 and let 3 in, but the biggest point of contention for the Oilers has been relatively solid. Obviously, they're in the Stanley Cup Finals, so a lot of pieces for the Oilers that can go right and maybe flip this series on its head. But again, if Bobrovsky continues to play the way he does and you start to get contributions from a guy like Tkachuk, the Panthers have a chance of running away really quickly with this one.
Yeah, they really could. Like you said, they could get on a roll and really just dominate. It's going to be interesting with that star power that Edmonton has. Do they get going too? So it's going to be a fun series, man. Both of these championship series in the NBA and the NHL both should be very compelling the next couple of weeks.
And we could have 2 St. Louis-based champions here in the next couple of weeks as well. Could we see the NBA trophy and the Stanley Cup back in St. Louis here very, very soon? We shall see. AJ McCarron back out on the field for the Battlehawks. They take over in the third quarter, down 13-3. So we'll let you guys get back to watching that game, and make sure you guys come back next week for more Toasted Tavern. We may have some special guest announcements coming up here in the next couple of weeks as well, so make sure you pay attention to that. Until then, I am Michael Wagenknecht alongside Scott Tobin for the Toasted Tavern. We will see you next Sunday.